I have spent the last 2 weeks using the cheapest version of the new M3 Macbook Air as my only computer. And in that time, how has it held up? If we're completely being honest, the M3 Macbook Air is an excellent laptop, and while I did not really expect to hate it over the last week because, let's face it, this is just a refresh with a new chip, nevertheless, I enjoyed my time. But also over the last week, there are a few things that haven't exactly sat well with me, which we'll dive into very soon. But for now, you may wonder what exactly I have used this for in the past couple of days. For one, this is just the base model, so I didn't really do anything crazy. Simple things like attending to emails or editing videos, admin work, Excel sheets, basically using this the same way students or the working professionals will use a brand new Apple laptop. So sit back, relax, and let's get started on knowing if this is worth your time. Speaking of knowing if this is worth your time, let's start this off with the price and what you get. Like I said, this is the cheapest model, so this is about $10.99 USD. So Apple is keeping the price the same way, which is great. Don't get me wrong, it might be the cheapest, but in reality, there is absolutely nothing cheap about it. For $10.99, you get an 8-core M3 processor, 8GB of unified memory, and 256GB of storage. Which brings me to things that I did not like. 256GB of storage for a computer in 2024 is ridiculous, especially from Apple for that matter, especially a laptop that costs $1,100 USD. Having 250GB of storage means if you use this for a core 9 to 5 or as a creator, you need to carry around a hard drive to accommodate the lack of space. On a computer, you realistically get around 220, 225, just because the operating system takes about 20 to 25 gig on its own. If you then said to yourself, okay, let me upgrade to 512 gig, it'll cost you $200 more. Now, I've been singing this song since the M1 MacBook Air. Laptops should have a base storage of 512. It's just the way it should be. Now, moving on to something that made me happy and disappointed at the same time is the performance of the M3 chip. Now, when it comes to speed and workflow, the M3 MacBook Air is really fast, and I'm not really talking about the benchmark scores. I'm talking about using it in my everyday workflow. Video calling, Google Docs, and just being productive. Everything feels snappy, and that has to do with the updated M3 chip. Compared to the M1 and in some cases the M2 MacBook Air, it feels faster. Now, while Apple is marketing this as a content creation tool that gives a lot of power, if you're into video content creating and everything you do is within Final Cut or Premiere or DaVinci Resolve, you might have a hard time using the base model of this laptop. With the way different cameras are getting sophisticated in 2024, whether it be on your mobile phone, a DSLR, or a mirrorless camera, there are certain specs a computer has to utilize each 4K 30 or 4K 60 file. And the M3 MacBook Air does not do a great job in that regard. Again, this is just a base model, and in my experience in the last week, it struggled editing 4K 60 from my Sony FX30. It stuttered a lot, my timeline was not smooth, so it was difficult cutting and placing clips where I wanted it to be. And it is safe to say that I was very disappointed because editing videos is what I do every day. It goes without saying that if you upgrade the specs to say 16GB or 24GB of RAM, it will give you better results. But with the base model, it does everything else but edit videos the way you want it to. Now, also, I want to add, it does not do well with Google Chrome while a lot of tabs are open. Once I started opening many tabs at the same time, it began to get rough. The 8 gigs of RAM began to show why it should be 16 gig instead. Remember, a lot of websites are now basically programs that are active all the time and take a lot of memory. So if you're buying the cheapest or the base model, you can have a lot of tabs open in the background like many other expensive Apple laptops. In Apple fashion, this is just a refresh of the M2 MacBook Air, so the design is exactly the same. Don't get me wrong, it is still a premium laptop. It's not the heaviest, so you can definitely move this around to different coffee shops, or if you're traveling, it just fits into most backpacks. Now, even though this is the same design, there is one fundamental change Apple made, and I'm really happy about it. They found a way to reduce the smudges and the fingerprint marks on your laptop. So if you wanted to get the midnight color, for example, you can go right ahead, so that is a major W. Another major W with the M3 MacBook Air is you can now export to 2 external monitors instead of 1 like the M2 MacBook Air. Personally, exporting to one display one display right here is fine by me, but there are people who love to use 2 displays for their work. So managing multiple projects, coding and the likes are just easier. But there's always a but. FYI, if you're going to export to multiple displays, you need to bring along your own keyboard or your own mouse, because if you open the laptop to use the trackpad or Touch ID, it turns off one external display. Why it does that, I absolutely have no idea. Now, if you're going to use the keyboard itself, I'm happy to say that it is still pretty good. I have written 2 scripts so far with a few Instagram reels, and it's done a good job. The display is also standard from the M2. It is 13 inches with a notch. I appreciate the brightness a lot. Currently, it is one of the hottest days in the winter, and I can perfectly see with this display without any issues. And with the notch itself, it houses its camera. It is still a 1080p webcam, so that's okay, I guess. The speakers are pretty good and on par with the M2 Macbook Air. I am really particular about speakers on my laptop, so I can say that this is pretty good and it's loud enough with good bass. And finally, we have the battery life, which has been pretty on par with the rest of the MacBook Air lineup. This will easily get you through a day of work or even multiple days if you aren't really pushing the processor to its utmost limit. I also continue to love that you don't really need to be plugged into a wall to get the full power of your laptop. All that power and usability matched with an 18-hour battery life is what makes the M1, the M2, and now the M3 one of the best laptops out there. The fact that you can do all this without having to worry about your battery life is pretty amazing. So now the question is, should you buy the M3 MacBook Air? And I believe that is the biggest glaring issue with this laptop. It is in a weird position because when you start upgrading the specs to cater to your needs, you should just get an M3 MacBook Pro instead. If you're looking for power, that is definitely the route you should go. If you want to spend less money, then just get the M2 MacBook Air instead. It is currently $999 in the Apple Store. It is honestly the same laptop. That's why it is very hard to recommend the M3 MacBook Air, especially when there are just better value laptops out there. Thank you guys for watching this video, and if you love this, click that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. My name is KJ, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.